Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I hope you're doing remarkably well. Loads of love. And before we get started, don't forget the normal order of things is to get that quintessential glass of something special, because you deserve it. Don't forget that. You deserve something special to drink. And if you're drinking something a little bit way out and extraordinaire, don't forget to tell us all about it, because we're all very interested. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Wilson and I'm from Calgary in Canada and have lived here all my life. My wife and I happen to own a very successful, thriving restaurant in the local town. But the trouble is, when you do run a booming business, it's all hands on deck all the time, as anyone who's worked in the restaurant industry will be able to enlighten you with. I tend to manage all the affairs of my restaurant by visiting the best local suppliers and supervising the behind-the-scenes staff, including our incredible chef Pierre, who has worked in Paris, Milan and Bombay. And so he knows a thing or two about cooking and creates signature dishes using his Eastern influences with a touch of savoir-faire that has earned him an illustrious reputation. He also enjoys sourcing local ingredients, as the quality of your produce really affects the flavour and taste of your food, so we acquire all our vegetables, dairy and meat from local farmers. I met my wife Janine in a bookshop of all things, in the recipe section, would you believe, where we found ourselves in a heated debate over the best meatloaf recipe, and I told her that I made the best and she needed to sample it, so I invited her over for dinner to try it out, and of course the rest is history, although I do have to concede that her grandmother's recipe for meatloaf far exceeds mine. Janine works in the front line, supervising the waiters and organising the waitresses and greeting customers and leading them all to their tables, and she has such a warm, convivial personality, so much so that people are always drawn to her. It was after we got married we decided we deserved a break, even if it only meant spending a couple of days escaping to the mountains. I did feel really rather bad that I couldn't whisk Janine off to Paris for a weekend's romantic honeymoon, which had been my intention all along, but we couldn't spare the time. One of my customers, a delightful woman called Sheila Blades, who eats regularly at our restaurant, literally begged us to use her tiny holiday cabin in Banff that was lying completely empty. "Please," she begged, "you'll be doing me a great big favour. It's about an hour and a half's drive from here, so you'll get there pretty quickly. I have a nimble old man in his 80s called Sully managing the place and living in a wooden hut in the woods there. I'd just like someone to man the fort and keep everything clean when I'm not around. And Sully does it all. He's fastidious and hard-working, despite his advancing years, and loves nothing better than being close to nature. It's a very picturesque part of the world, and I hate to think of it just lying there empty for months on end. My husband and I used to visit it frequently in the summer for fishing weekends, but after he hurt his knee, he's found it difficult to stand for long periods of time. It's fully equipped, but you will need to bring your own food, and perfect at this time of the year, because like Calgary, it's warm and dry, and the autumn colours are exquisite. But don't get me wrong, at night it can be very chilly." "If you're sure," I said, "I would be delighted to accept your kind offer." "It's open to you any time," she said, generously opening her handbag and pulling out the cabin keys, and then a piece of paper to draw a map on for me. "How long have you had the cabin?" I asked curiously. "Oh, it's been in our family for over 3 generations," she said. "It's very rustic, comfortable and tiny, but it's been used by my family for hunting, fishing and camping trips. I did have it kitted out by an interior designer once to maximise the space and to make it more efficient. But it's cosy and intimate and perfect for a newly married couple like yourselves, looking for a romantic escape. You're going at the best time of the year, when most of the tourists have left Banff, and that's a good thing." And so it was that my wife and I made our way to Banff, and for anyone who's familiar with that part of the world, it's renowned for its spectacular scenic vistas, from prominent glaciers, mountains, coniferous forests, exquisite lakes, flowery prairies, and so much more. It was in October of 2006 when we visited Banff, and I was determined to make these 3 days spectacular for my wife. So on our way to the cabin, which was a very short drive indeed, we stopped in the exquisite town of Banff, which is situated high up in the Rocky Mountains and really rather reminds me of Switzerland due to its prairie-like architecture, well, in many of the buildings, along with a Tudor rustic influence. And wood and stone have often been used creatively with ingenious skill to convey structural impression. It gives the town a magical fairy tale-like ambience. We stopped for a bite to eat at a Greek restaurant that they call Balcom, that had been in Banff since the beginning of World War II, and we ate the most exquisite melt-in-the-mouth deep-fried cheese balls and some saganati, which is breaded sheep's cheese, that they light up with brandy at the table, and it was served with pitta and tomato and onion salsa, and was absolutely delicious. We then stocked up on supplies, including delicious homemade granola bars, and off we went. It wasn't long before my Jeep Wrangler was jolting down some pretty dodgy roads that were clearly not designed for comfort in mind, for they were rugged, rocky, precipitous, and the journey was very bumpy. But before long we entered an open cattle gate and drove down a gravel drive towards a very attractive tiny wooden cabin that was much smaller than I'd even envisaged, but still in remarkably good condition, made from very old wooden timber beams. It overlooked the prettiest creek that was set against these imposing statuesque mountains, and on the left and right-hand side of the cabin were ubiquitous trees full of Engelmann pines, Salfine firs and spruce trees that stretched back into a vast sylvan. The inside of the cabin was very small, but somehow it worked, as the decor had definitely been designed with open-plan living in mind, where the little kitchen folded into the living area and then into the bedroom, with the pièce de résistance being an open-plan fireplace. "It's utterly delightful," said my wife. "But why so dusty and unkept? I don't understand it. I thought you said Mrs. Blades said an old man keeps the place in fastidious condition. But look, there's dust absolutely everywhere. Dead insects and cobwebs, and even some rat droppings. But it's not something I can't fix," she said, looking inside the kitchen cabinet to retrieve a duster. "It is odd," I admitted. "Mrs. Blades assured me that the old man looked after the place for her." "Perhaps he only bothers to clean when he knows that she's coming, Mrs. Blades, I mean. We've had staff working for us like that. They only work when they're being watched, to put on a good front. But the second that your back is turned, you'll catch them smoking in the corridors. And there are people out there waiting for orders. It drives me completely insane." "Good point," I said. "Poor work ethics, that's what they call it." While my wife unpacked the Jeep and ran a duster over the place, I prepared a fire, and before long our cosy little cabin was lovely and warm, with a welcome fire crackling away merrily in the grate. After my wife had cleaned up the place, the transformation was literally miraculous, as the cabin magically became a snug, welcoming den. My wife was rinsing some dusty wine glasses in the sink when, glancing through the window, she saw an elderly-looking woman walking towards our cabin. "Look, there's a woman coming over to the cabin," she told me. I promptly went outside to meet our mystery guest and invited her inside. "Ooh, this is lovely," she said, ambling towards the fire to warm herself up. I could tell she was in her late 70s, with very fine wrinkled skin, short curly grey hair, and pale blue eyes. She appeared rather flustered and discomposed, but I thought it was due to her invigorating walk. It never occurred to me that she was secretly stressing out a little and rather anxious about our rendezvous. "It's getting so chilly at night these days," she said. "You can feel the weather's definitely changing, and summer's long since over. But during the day you can't complain, because the weather's very pleasant. Besides, autumn is my favourite time of the year. I just love the rich, vibrant yellows and reds of all the trees, not to mention many of the tourists have gone by now. But don't let the shopkeepers hear me say that. The tourism industry is so good. But I do like it when they go home. I'm not going to lie about that." "I can understand that," I said. "Banff is a magnificent mountain town. Sorry, can I offer you a glass of wine?" "Wouldn't say no," said the woman. "I've had a wee bit of a long walk up here, and I'm a bit out of breath. At my age, my bones are beginning to ache. I watched her sitting down on the couch next to the fire, and noted she appeared weary, fatigued, and somewhat, as I said, out of breath. I secretly wondered why she'd taken the trouble to walk all this way to visit us at the cabin. "Sorry," I said. "I didn't catch your name." "Oh, I do apologise. How awfully rude of me," she said. "Do mind my appalling manners. I'm Edith Harrison. I'm Solomon's younger sister. Well, he's known as Sully, really. You know, the man that lives out here in the woods and is supposed to take care of the place." "Oh, yes. We were informed about his presence here. But I must admit I haven't seen him yet," I said. "Well, I'm afraid he's never coming back. Never to work here," she said, looking at me with wide, earnest eyes. "Never." "Oh dear," I said. "I do hope he's all right. We're only here for 3 days, so we can manage perfectly without his help. We will be absolutely fine." "That's what concerns me," said the woman, taking a big gulp of her wine and staring at us awkwardly. "Will you be fine? That is the big question." "Sorry," I said. "I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about." "There's something malevolent living in the woods," whispered Edith. "Something Herculean in size and atrociously evil. It floats on 2 powerful legs with the face of a man and the body of a demonical beast, covered from head to toe with hair. So bewitchingly black that it's almost blue in colour. And its evil, haunting eyes are as red as traffic lights." At that astounding, bizarre revelation, I almost choked on my wine, and in unison my wife and I looked at each other and said, "What?" "I know you're going to think I'm very silly. You're going to think I'm an overwrought old woman that has lost her marbles, and believe me, I can really understand that. But I've known Sully all my life, and he's never lied a day in his life since he was a youngster. He has hunted, trapped, and even worked as a tree feller in those woods, and he knows them like the back of his hands. What he saw that night was real, and it was a monstrous humanoid being of some kind." "It might help," said my wife, "if you could explain exactly what happened to Sully that night." "Well, I arrived home to my cottage after my shift at the bakery, and I found Sully sitting on my front porch, staring blankly into space with fixed eyes. It was like he was completely spaced out and barely even noticed me. I had no idea what had happened and what he was doing at my place, but I brought him into the kitchen, and he continued to just stare vacantly with glazed eyes, rather like a dead fish. It scared the hell out of me to see him like this. His outlandish behaviour was so unusual for him, so I called out the doctor, and after checking his vitals and running some routine blood tests, the doctors assured me that nothing was wrong with him. He believed that Sully was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and promptly prescribed some sedatives for him and recommended some hypnotherapy, which he believed could work wonders, but I have not actually tried that protocol yet." My wife gasped. "Poor Sully! How long was he like that for?" "Easily over 4 weeks, and what you need to understand about Sully is that he doesn't scare easily. So what happened to him must have been absolutely horrifying. Anyway, one night I awoke to Sully screaming, 'No, no, no, please don't kill me, no, no,' as if he was having a bad, discomposing nightmare. And he seemed to be fighting off something in his sleep. He was writhing, tossing and turning, and his whole body was literally soaked with sweat. I remember shaking him so hard to wake him up from his sleep, and I asked him what the heck was going on. He was very reluctant to tell me his story, and begged me never to tell a living soul what I'm about to tell you now." "Did he remember everything?" I asked. "That's the problem with trauma," said Edith. "It's all the remembering and reliving the events over and over again in your mind. It's completely soul-destroying, and it happens to soldiers of wars, victims of abuse, catastrophic accidents, and, of course, heinous duplicitous crimes. If these poor people could forget, their troubles would be over in seconds. It's the remembering that's the big problem." "Very eloquently put, Edith, if I may say," I said. "So what did happen to your brother?" "Well, I think it was about 12:30 at night. It must have been over 5 weeks ago. It was on a Friday. Sully was awoken to the most god-awful scream. that he said was so terrifying because it sounded like a woman being attacked. But he sensed that that indeed was not the case, for he knows the sounds of the wood very well. He said the scream sounded like haunting and disembodied, almost as if it was paranormal. He said he couldn't comprehend such a sound, but he does know that Canada geese have been known to make some pretty scary noises, so he dismissed it out of hand. But all of a sudden he heard violent crashing sounds and realised that something was thumping his cabin, and he was absolutely terrified. Because whatever this thing was, it was clearly outside of his door, and began to grunt and breathe very heavily. He could feel this overwhelming sense that whatever was out there was predatory and colossal. He said although he could not see this thing, he could feel its presence and could taste, feel and smell danger. Finally everything calmed down, and so Sully stealthily opened the door with his rifle in his hands and peered out cautiously. He said it was really odd because something felt very off. He told me the woods were eerily quiet, unusually so, and the chirps of the crickets and croaks of the frogs had all but dissipated. He had never known that to happen before. That was when Bert saw something so preposterous and bizarre it turned his blood ice cold. All his yard tools, which he kept outside in the old chicken coop, were lying on the ground in a very Pacific star-like pattern, almost like a sinister-looking crop circle, if you like. And some of his hefty metal tools had been bent deliberately backwards and curled in order to create the design, which he was certain conveyed some kind of hidden message. For a second his angst was suppressed with thoughts of, who the heck did this? As it would take great strength to bend back a yard spade. Nobody human could do that. So he put down his rifle and went to investigate the strange enigmatic situation. And that was when he saw the beast, who was standing in the tree line, just watching him. At first he thought he was staring at a demon, but the creature bounded towards him a little like a dog, but his movements were much more fluid and graceful, and Sully said he almost moved like he was skating on ice. The critter then stopped, standing only yards away from him, and it curled back its lips, displaying its teeth, and began to growl viciously, like a lion. And the sound literally reverberated through his chest, causing his heart to pound violently in his chest, so much so that he could feel its vibration. He also describes a bitter, nauseous taste rising up in the back of his throat that he has never ever experienced before, but actually believes it's the taste of danger. He said he wanted to run away, but he couldn't, and he knew if he used his rifle on this creature, he would almost certainly be dead, as he wouldn't stand a chance in tackling it, who in his opinion was so strapping and well built, he almost looked like he was made of iron, and it would also take a very high-caliber rifle to bring him down. He tried to think quickly, but his rational mind and thoughts seemed clouded by fog, and despite his very best efforts, he was unable to move a muscle. He describes this as the most terrifying moment of his life. He felt as if he was staring death in the face, like being in front of a firing squad, with every passing second coming closer to his imminent demise. But everything transpired so fast, and yet the experience for him lasted a lifetime. The livid creature lunged towards him and appeared to be enraged, incensed and angry. Sully sensed it was being very territorial and just simply didn't want him around. All of a sudden, Sully felt the creature's hands on his hips, and the next thing he knew was that he was thrown over the creature's shoulders like a large sack of oranges. Sully said he could hear the creature's breathing and smell its sweat as it glided with him still on his back, over rugged terrain, across a valley and through the woods. And believe me, he did try to escape, but the powerful hand that held him down was firm and hard, like the weight of a heavy tire upon him. He was filled with an overwhelming sense of impending doom that assaulted his senses, and he knew he had to think fast on his feet, or he could potentially end up dead. "Oh, my word," I gasped. "That is dreadful." That is exactly what Sully said. He said a still voice in his mind told him to just whistle a tune, and so that is what he did. You mean the creature was running with Sully while he was whistling a tune? That's exactly right. The moment he started whistling the Guns N' Roses tune, the creature immediately put him down on the ground. Sully described the creature's demeanour as changing so dramatically, like that from a dark thundercloud to a bright, shining rainbow. He was astonished. The explosive, volatile expression on the creature just softened, and he sensed a very excitable energy. The critter indicated for him to whistle that tune again and again, and he listened intently and became very pleased, rather like a child at Christmas that's received a present he's always longed for and wanted. The creature in seconds forgot his anger, which subsided and collapsed very fast like a cake from the oven that flops. It began imitating the tune, and he was a quick and fast learner. Sully said the critter copied that whistle perfectly, with a photographic memory that was mind-blowing. He'd never seen anything like it before. It was like he learnt the Guns N' Roses tune in seconds, which is impossible, but I promise you it happened, and Sully said the creature was so thrilled that he left him there and glided away, whistling the new song happily to himself. Sully believed the Guns N' Roses tune literally saved his life. "Wow! That is the most incredible story I've ever heard," I said. "I'm so glad that Sully is alive." After having met Edith, I can honestly say that my wife and I were feeling very unsettled. Well, in honest truth, it really was me, I suppose. I was wondering if we should pack everything up and book a hotel in Banff, but my wife persuaded me otherwise. She said that if we encountered the creature, we could subdue him with our whistling, which was her way of lightening the mood, as she has a good sense of humour and never allows herself to get stressed. She's a very grounded person, unlike me. "I'm worried about Edith's story," I said. "I would feel a lot better if we packed up and left. We could book a lovely hotel in Banff." "Don't be ridiculous," Janine laughed. "I'm sure that Sully had a chance encounter with the strange creature, and I'm willing to bet he's long since gone." "But Sully could have been killed," I protested, "and we have no weapons of defence with us. I didn't bring my rifle with me. It never occurred to me to do so." "I told you," laughed Janine, "we can whistle. Anyway," she said, "if you want my honest opinion, I'm not certain the creature was actually planning to kill Sully. I don't feel that in my gut somehow. I believe that was his perception." "Are you for real, Janine?" I piped. "Why was the creature carrying Sully on his back then?" "Well, think about it like this. If he'd really wanted Sully dead, he would have killed him and thrown him on his back. A cargo is a hell of a lot easier to manage if it's not kicking and screaming and trying to get away," she suggested. And so it was, with a heavy heart and a great deal of reluctance, I decided to stay at the cabin. And before long, Janine and I were tucking into delicious bowls of spaghetti carbonara, served with a large crisp salad, washed back with glasses of white wine, and we were beginning to laugh and joke, and I forgot my grievous concerns. After dinner, with a full stomach, I became sluggish and tired, and we both returned to bed, and thoughts of the strange critter that Sully had encountered was long since behind us. The following morning we set out for a long hike, and it was an exquisitely beautiful day. Looking back, I probably did see some anomalous things that I didn't pay much attention to, like tree breaks throughout the woods, but I didn't understand what those were at the time. On our way back from our hike, we discovered Solomon's cabin, which was so small it rarely consisted of a single room, and to our amazement it was covered with branches that had been layered on top of each other and covered in soft moss, as if something very big and sizable had been using this place as a nest, and that was rather discomposing. To add credence to Solomon's story, I discovered some buckled yard tools lying precariously under bushes and scattered everywhere around the wood green. I was astonished, because when I lifted up the large yard fork, every single one of those prongs was bent backwards, including the handle itself, and such a manoeuvre would take a masterful level of strength. All of a sudden we could hear a very heavy footfall, and we knew someone was coming our way, but who we couldn't imagine. And whoever they were, they had to be very hefty, because you could hear the ground thumping under their feet, and they were coming towards Solly's old cabin. But this thing was whistling the Gun and Roses tune, and it took huge strides that we barely had time to react. And that was when we saw him. Nothing prepared me for what I was seeing. Nothing at all. Truly, there are no words. This monstrous, giant, dark, hairy humanoid towered at about 9 foot tall. It was built like a solid army tank, robust, lanky, sinewy and muscular. It looked to be half man and half beast, with a pyramid-shaped head that seamlessly folded into the shoulders, and the creature had the face and hands and, of course, the feet of a man. It stopped dead in its tracks, looking surprised and bewildered to see us, as if we were the last thing he'd expected to see. He was carrying a dead deer over his shoulders and immediately stopped whistling the moment he saw us. In that second, I discerned that I was in the presence of an apex predator. There was no doubt about that in my mind. I could feel my heart thumping in my chest and felt very apprehensive, as I knew this intimidating creature was the one that Sully had encountered. My wife immediately began whistling the Guns and Roses tune, and the critter became very animated and delighted and began to whistle the tune back to my wife, and she began to clap in time to the tune, and the creature looked absolutely thrilled. I was amazed that this creature had learnt the tune off by heart without even knowing the Guns and Roses song. Then my wife began to whistle another song, My Heart Will Go On, from Titanic, and it wasn't long before the creature caught on and was copying the tune exactly, and once again it took him only seconds to learn it. I was gobsmacked. How is that even possible? I stared at my wife in amazement, as though looking at her for the very first time in my life, because her energy was incredibly calm and centred. She was friendly and warm towards the creature, while I initially wanted to scream and run for my life. Janine's energy literally relaxed me. The creature's reaction towards us was convivial and friendly, and in no way aggressive. It was clear he was certainly not going to attack us. We then waved to him and just walked away, while he stood there watching us with an awestruck expression on his face, while he continued to whistle the new tune to himself. "How the heck did you do that?" I asked Janine, looking at her in astonishment. "You're incredible." "Just because the creature looks dangerous and menacing," she said, "it doesn't mean he hasn't got a heart in there. It's about tapping into the heart. That's what you need to do in a dangerous situation. Do you know, I once heard of a man breaking into someone's house and assaulting a woman. And the woman said to him, 'What would your mother think about what you're doing to me?' The man immediately stopped the assault and left at once, as thoughts of his mother tapped into that heart centre." "I don't care what you say, Janine, but we're not staying here another day. We're going to a hotel in Banff, and now." "If you say so," said Janine, smiling. And so that is what we did, and we did have a wonderful time. It truly was amazing how different Janine's reaction was to the creature, as opposed to mine. I saw danger, threat, death. She saw beauty, magnificence, wonder. It seemed that Janine's sister Julia knew the creature we saw was called a Bigfoot, and the two of them became obsessed over the subject. Of course, I did not tell Mrs. Sheila Blades about what I'd encountered at her cabin, as I didn't feel it was my place to do so. "Can you believe it?" she told me. "Solly has really let me down. He doesn't want to look after my place any more. He says his arthritis is getting really bad these days, so I've had to find someone else to man the fort. It's a dreadful pity." I gather that Mrs. Blades has been back to her cabin a few times in the summer, but clearly she's had no interactions with that strange creature, because believe me, I would know about it if she had. As Mrs. Blades, one thing about her, is she loves to talk and talk. So there you are. That's my story. What a phenomenal story. Thank you so very much for sharing. Don't forget to subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, goodbye and good night.